My daughter-in-law looked the nurse straight in the eyes and said, "She can't take care of herself anymore." She said it so calmly, so naturally, like she was talking about an old piece of furniture instead of me. I sat frozen in the wheelchair they insisted I use, staring at the polished floors of the nursing home lobby while soft piano music played overhead. The place smelled like bleach, stale coffee, and loneliness. Elderly people sat silently near the windows, wrapped in blankets while daytime television flickered across the room. And standing beside me, holding a folder full of papers, was Vanessa, my son's wife, the woman I once trusted with holiday dinners, family recipes, and the spare key to my home. Now she was handing me over to strangers. "She's been forgetting things," Vanessa continued gently. The doctor agreed. "She needs supervision." "Doctor? What doctor?" I turned slowly toward her, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never agreed to this." Vanessa gave me that same fake sympathetic smile she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, Margaret!" You were confused. "Remember?" No, I remembered everything. That was the problem. I remembered the way she slowly started taking control after my husband Harold died. I remembered missing bank statements, missing mail, missing medication bottles. I remembered how she always answered questions for me whenever people visited. She gets overwhelmed easily. She's very forgetful lately. She's not herself. Tiny little lies. Tiny little seeds. And now those lies had become paperwork. The receptionist handed me a clipboard. Admission forms. Medication authorization. Emergency contact information. I looked down at the pages, and suddenly my chest tightened. Vanessa had already filled everything out. My address, my insurance, my medical history, even my room preference. This had been planned long before today. My fingers trembled slightly as I flipped through the documents. Then I saw it. Cognitive decline. Underneath it were words that made my stomach drop. Patient displays increasing confusion and impaired judgment. I looked up slowly. "You told them I'm mentally unstable?" Vanessa sighed softly, like she was exhausted from loving me too much. "We're trying to protect you." Protect me. Protect me. That word almost made me laugh. Because people who protect you don't secretly pack your belongings while you're sleeping. They don't take your phone. They don't change the locks on your house. And they definitely don't put you in a nursing home while your son is thousands of miles away, working overseas. That was the part she thought made her smart. Daniel was in Dubai finishing a luxury hotel project. He trusted Vanessa completely. Every time we spoke on FaceTime, she sat nearby controlling the conversation before I could even finish a sentence. "She's doing okay." She had another confusing day. She forgot where she put her medication. Meanwhile, I was standing in my own kitchen, baking pies and paying bills perfectly fine. But manipulation is dangerous because it happens slowly, quietly, by the time you realize someone is rewriting your reality. Everyone else already believes the new version. The nurse smiled politely and pointed toward the signature line. "Whenever you are ready, Mrs. Whitmore." I stared at the paper for several long seconds. Then I signed it. Vanessa immediately relaxed beside me. I could actually see relief wash across her face. Like she'd finally won. That was her second mistake. Because while she was celebrating, she never noticed something important. My signature was perfectly steady, perfectly clear, not the signature of a confused old woman. I handed the clipboard back calmly. Then I looked directly into her eyes and smiled. Not warmly, not weakly, just quietly. The same smiles Harold used to say frightened, dishonest people. For the first time all morning, Vanessa looked uncomfortable. Only for a second, but I saw it. Fear. Tiny, but real. The nurse began wheeling me toward the hallway. Vanessa walked beside us in her expensive heels, speaking softly about medication schedules and physical therapy like she was some devoted caregiver. but I barely listened anymore. Because suddenly everything made sense. The missing paperwork, the changed passwords, the doctor I never remembered meeting, the pressure to stop driving, the way Vanessa kept insisting I was tired whenever guests came over. This was never about my health. It was about my house, 42 acres outside Austin. Land Harold built with his own hands, land worth millions now, and Vanessa thought she was about to take it. As we reached my room, she leaned closer and whispered quietly into my ear. We already changed the locks, by the way. For a moment, my heart broke all over again. Not because of the house, because of the betrayal. Because after 72 years of life, after raising children, after burying my husband, after surviving every hardship life handed me, I was being erased from my own family by the woman who used to call me Mom. Vanessa smiled one last time and turned to leave. But before she walked away, I spoke softly. You should have read Harold's trust more carefully. She stopped, just slightly. Then she kept walking. But I noticed something very important. She didn't look confident anymore. And as the Texas sunset burned orange outside my tiny nursing home window, I folded my hands quietly in my lap and took a slow breath. They thought I was confused. That was their first mistake. The first night inside that nursing home, I barely slept. Every sound felt unfamiliar. The distant coughs from other rooms. The squeaking wheels of medication carts rolling down the hallway at midnight. The low hum of fluorescent lights that never completely turned off. I lay awake, against the ceiling, thinking about my house, my home. Not the market value. Not the land itself, the life inside it. The kitchen Harold built for me after our 20th anniversary. The porch swing where we drank coffee every morning before sunrise. The old garage that still smelled faintly, like motor oil and cedar wood, because Harold spent half his life fixing things with his hands. 46 years of marriage lived inside those walls. And now, Vanessa had locked me out of it, like I was some unwanted tenant. Around 2 a.m, I turned slowly onto my side and looked at the small dresser beside my bed. The nursing home staff had unpacked a few of my things already. 3 sweaters, family photos, my reading glasses, and Harold's old wristwatch. I reached for it carefully and held it against my chest. That watch stopped the night Harold died. I never fixed it. Part of me didn't want time moving forward after that. Harold had been gone almost 3 years now, but grief doesn't disappear with time, the way people pretend it does. It just changes shape. Some mornings it feels like silence at the breakfast table. Other mornings it feels like reaching for someone who isn't there anymore. And sometimes it feels like your own family slowly replacing you while you're still alive. The next morning, I forced myself to eat breakfast in the dining hall. Scrambled eggs, dry toast, weak coffee. Most of the residents barely spoke. Some stared blankly at televisions, mounted high in the corners. Others just looked tired, deeply tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. I understood that feeling immediately. A cheerful nurse walked over holding a clipboard. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Did you sleep well?" "Well enough," she smiled kindly. "Your daughter called earlier." Daughter. I almost corrected her, but honestly, it hurt less hearing that than hearing daughter-in-law. Vanessa had already created a story here. I could feel it. The confused widow, the concerned family, the difficult decision. People always believe the calm liar over the emotional victim. That's what makes manipulation so dangerous. After breakfast, I sat near the window in the common room, watching birds gather outside near a dry fountain. Texas heat shimmered across the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, I heard lawn equipment buzzing. Normal life continued outside, while mine had been quietly stolen. Then memories started replaying in my head. Little moments I ignored before. About 2 months earlier, I'd noticed Vanessa standing beside the mailbox. Before I could get to it, I already sorted everything. she'd said casually. At the time, I thought she was trying to help. Now I wondered what she removed before I ever saw it. Then there was the pharmacies incident. Vanessa kept telling everyone I picked up the wrong prescription because I was confused. What she conveniently left out was that she was the one who sent me there after changing pharmacies without telling me and the doctor. God, the doctor. 3 weeks ago, she drove me to some young physician I'd never met before because my regular doctor had apparently retired. The appointment lasted maybe 15 minutes. Vanessa answered almost every question herself. She repeats stories. She forgets conversations. She gets emotional. I remembered sitting there quietly while two strangers discussed me like I wasn't even in the room. At one point, I tried to explain that grief affected memory sometimes after losing a spouse. The doctor barely looked at me, but he listened carefully to Vanessa. That memory made my stomach turn now. Because suddenly I realized the truth. They weren't evaluating me. They were building a case. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I looked up and saw an older nurse standing nearby. Her name tag, Gloria. She looked to be around my age. Silver hair pulled back neatly. Sharp eyes that noticed too much. "You're Margaret, right?" I nodded slowly. She sat beside me without asking. "That woman yesterday," she said quietly. "Your daughter-in-law?" "Yes." Gloria hesitated for a second, then lowered her voice. "She filled out your intake paperwork before you arrived." Something cold slid through my chest. She also pushed pretty hard for memory care placement. I looked at her carefully. "Do you think I belong here?" Gloria studied me for several long seconds. Then she said something that made my pulse slow immediately. No, she answered softly. "I don't." For the first time since arriving there, I felt something dangerous return. Hope. Tiny, fragile, but real. Gloria leaned back in her chair and glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. Then she spoke very carefully. "I've worked in places like this for 22 years, she said. "And sometimes families bring people here because they need help." She paused. "And sometimes they bring them here because they want control." The room suddenly felt very quiet. I swallowed hard, because deep down, I already knew exactly which one Vanessa was. That afternoon, I stopped looking out the window and started paying attention.
Really paying attention.
The nursing home wasn't loud, but it wasn't peaceful either. There was a sadness sitting underneath everything. You could feel it in the slow footsteps, the blank stares, the televisions nobody actually watched. And the more I sat there quietly, the more I realized something terrifying. Most of the people around me had stopped fighting. That was the real danger of places like this. Not the medication, not the locked doors. Hopelessness. That's what finally breaks people. But Vanessa had made one critical mistake. She assumed grief had already broken me before she got here. She didn't know if I survived losing Harold. And after surviving that kind of pain, manipulation starts becoming easier to recognize. Around lunchtime, Gloria found me sitting alone near the courtyard doors. "You eat yet?" she asked. I shook my head. She handed me a small cup of coffee anyway. "Kitchen coffee's terrible," she whispered. "This one's from the staff room." For the first time in days, I smiled genuinely. "Thank you." She sat beside me carefully, lowering herself into the chair with the slow movements of someone whose knees hurt every morning. "You have children, besides your son?" she asked. "A daughter, Claire, lives in Oregon. You close?" I hesitated. "Not anymore." That answer carried more pain than I expected. Claire and Daniel used to be inseparable growing up. Sunday football games with Harold. Family camping trips near Lake Travis. Christmas morning so loud the walls practically shook. Then adulthood happened. Careers, marriages, distance. And slowly, family became phone calls instead of presents. Gloria nodded quietly, like she understood without needing details. Then she said something carefully. Your daughter-in-law keeps calling the front desk. I looked up immediately. What does she want? She asks if you seem confused. A cold feeling moved through my stomach. Every day. She was checking every day. Building her story. Gloria lowered her voice. She specifically asked staff to document memory problems. My jaw tightened slightly. That explained the strange questions nurses kept asking me. What year is it? Who's the president? Do you know where you are? Not concern. Evidence collection. I looked down at my untouched coffee. Do people really do this? I asked quietly. Gloria didn't answer right away. That silence told me enough already. Finally, she sighed. You'd be surprised what money does to families. Money. Funny thing about money. People blame greed for destroying families, but most of the time, greed only reveals what was already there. Vanessa never loved this family. She loved access. Access to Harold's land, Harold's savings, Harold's legacy. And now that he was gone, she thought I was the last obstacle, standing between her and everything we built. That evening, one of the younger nurses brought me medication in a tiny paper cup. I frowned immediately. These aren't mine. She checked the chart. Yes, they are. No, I said firmly. I've never taken these. The nurse looked confused. I picked up one pill carefully. Antipsychotic medication. My chest tightened instantly. What is this supposed to treat? She glanced back at the chart. Agitation, anxiety, behavioral instability. Behavioral instability. I almost laughed. Vanessa wasn't just trying to make me look forgetful anymore. She was trying to sedate me. Slowly, legally. On paper. I handed the cup back calmly. I'm not taking medication I was never prescribed before arriving here. The nurse hesitated awkwardly. I should probably call administration. Please do. 20 minutes later, Gloria appeared outside my room, looking angry, real angry. Not polite nursing home frustration. The kind of anger people get when they realize something immoral is happening. She authorized additional medication yesterday, Gloria said quietly after closing the door. She? Vanessa. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That's the strange thing about betrayal. Eventually, the pain becomes clarity. Everything suddenly made sense. The rushed paperwork. The memory care requests. The medication changes. She wasn't trying to care for me. She was trying to erase me. Gloria crossed her arms. Do you have a lawyer? I looked at Harold's old wristwatch sitting beside the bed. Yes, I answered slowly. An old one. Good. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. A phone number. I probably shouldn't be doing this, she admitted quietly. But something about your situation feels wrong. Wrong. That word barely covered it anymore. I looked at the number in my hand while my thoughts raced quietly. Harold always handled legal matters carefully. Trusts, property rights, wills. He used to say, land turned relatives into strangers the second somebody died. At the time, I thought he sounded cynical. Now I realized he sounded experienced. That night, I waited until the hallway became quiet before using the nurse's station phone. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed the number from memory. 3 rings. Then a familiar voice answered. Law Office of Benjamin Carter. I closed my eyes briefly. Ben, Harold's attorney for almost 30 years. This is Margaret Whitmore, I said softly. Silence. Then immediate concern. Margaret? Are you all right? I stared out the dark nursing home window toward the distant Texas highway lights. And for the first time since arriving there, I finally said the truth out loud. No, I whispered. I don't think my daughter-in-law put me here, because she loves me. Ben Carter came to see me the next morning. The second I saw him walking through the nursing home lobby in his dark blue suit, something inside me finally steadied. Ben was in his 70s now. Tall and thin, with silver hair and tired eyes that had probably seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. But when he looked at me, He looked genuinely disturbed. "Margaret," he said softly, pulling out the chair beside mine. "What the hell is going on?" I almost broke down right there. Not because someone finally believed me, because someone finally asked. I folded my hands carefully in my lap. "Vanessa says I'm confused." Ben stared at me for maybe 3 seconds before shaking his head. "You're the sharpest woman Harold ever knew." That sentence hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I could almost hear Harold laughing somewhere nearby. Ben lowered his voice. "I reviewed the trust this morning after your call." My pulse slowed immediately. And his jaw tightened. "There have been attempts to access portions of Harold's estate." I felt cold all over. "By Vanessa?" "She used Daniel's authorization twice." That part hurt. Not because Daniel betrayed me intentionally, but because he trusted the wrong person. Ben continued carefully. "She's been asking questions about transfer conditions, competency clauses, property authority. Things most daughters-in-law normally don't ask." I looked down at my hands. Harold warned me once. About 6 months before he died. We were sitting on the porch drinking coffee before sunrise, when he suddenly said something strange. "If anything happens to me, don't let people rush you." At the time, I thought he meant grief, funeral decisions, paperwork. I never imagined he meant war. Ben opened a folder slowly. "Margaret, did you sign any new medical documents recently?" My stomach tightened immediately. "The doctor Vanessa took me to." Ben nodded once. "That doctor filed a recommendation questioning your independent living capability." I felt physically sick. So it was official now. Documented. File stranger had spent 15 minutes with me, and suddenly I was mentally unstable. Ben leaned closer. "Did he evaluate you privately at any point?" I thought back carefully. "No," Vanessa answered almost everything. Even when I tried speaking, she interrupted gently. "She gets embarrassed. She's having trouble remembering. She repeats herself. Tiny lies, tiny manipulations, tiny performances, repeated over and over until they started sounding real." And suddenly I remembered something else. A conversation from weeks earlier. I'd come downstairs late one night for water and heard Vanessa whispering on the phone in the kitchen. At the time, I only caught part of it. But now, every word came back perfectly clear. Once she's declared mentally unstable, everything transfers faster. I stopped breathing for a second. Ben immediately noticed my face change. "What?" I looked at him slowly. I heard her. "Hear what?" I swallowed hard, then repeated the sentence exactly as she said it. Ben went completely still. Not surprised, not confused. Angry. Cold angry. Did Daniel know? I don't think so. And honestly, that was the tragedy of all this. Daniel wasn't cruel. Weak, maybe. Distracted. Too trusting. But not cruel. Vanessa understood that weakness better than anyone. She knew how to sound concerned instead of controlling. How to sound loving instead of manipulative. That's why people like her are dangerous. They don't scream. They curate perception. Ben removed his glasses slowly and rubbed his eyes. "She moved too quickly." "What does that mean?" "It means she got greedy." He opened the trust document, pointed towards several highlighted sections. Harold had protected the ranch carefully before his death. The property technically remained under a protected family trust until I either passed away, willingly transferred authority, or was legally declared mentally incompetent. Vanessa wasn't waiting for nature. She was manufacturing incompetence. The realization sat inside my chest like ice. Ben looked directly at me. "Margaret, I need you to answer honestly." I nodded. "Do you feel unsafe around your daughter-in-law?" Unsafe. Such a simple word for something so ugly. I thought about the missing medication, the changed locks, the confiscated phone, the antipsychotic pills, the lies, the isolation, and suddenly, I realized something terrifying. Vanessa wasn't trying to help me disappear emotionally. She was trying to erase me legally. Yes, I whispered finally. I do. Ben closed the folder carefully. Then we stopped playing defense. For the first time since Harold died, I felt something dangerous waking up inside me. Not rage. Something colder. Focus. Ben lowered his voice again. From this moment forward, you document everything. I nodded slowly. Every conversation, every medication attempt, every phone call, every inconsistency. The old clock near the nurse's station ticked softly somewhere behind us. Steady, patient. Ben leaned closer one last time. And Margaret? Yes? If Vanessa thinks you're weak, he said quietly, let her keep thinking that. After he left, I sat alone near the nursing home window, watching dark storm clouds gather over the Texas sky. And for the first time since being brought there against my will, I stopped feeling like a victim. Because now I finally understood what Vanessa really feared. Not my confusion. My clarity. That night, after Ben left, I couldn't stop thinking about Harold. Not the way he died, the way he lived. There's a dead difference. When people die, everyone suddenly acts like their entire life can be summarized in one funeral speech and a framed photo beside flowers. But real love doesn't live in speeches. It lives in ordinary moments. And Harold filled our life with ordinary moments. I sat alone near the nursing home window while rain rolled slowly down the glass, remembering the first summer we bought the ranch outside Austin. Back then, it was nothing but dry land, broken fencing, and an old farmhouse that leaned slightly to the left whenever the wind got strong. Most people thought we were crazy for buying it. Harold thought it was beautiful. We'll fix it, he told me the day we signed the papers. And somehow, we did. Piece by piece, year by year. We painted walls ourselves because we couldn't afford contractors. Harold rebuilt the with his own hands, after working 10-hour shifts all week. Every Saturday morning, he'd disappear into the garage with coffee and country music playing loud enough for the whole property to hear. Even now, I could still picture him under the hood of that old Ford truck he refused to sell. Grease on his hands, sunburn on his neck, smiling at me like I was still 25. A lump formed in my throat. Because none of those memories involved Vanessa. She arrived after the hard years were over, after the debt, after the sacrifices, after Harold and I spent 4 decades building something worth wanting. That's the thing greedy people never understand. They fall in love with the finished product. I closed my eyes and remembered Sunday football afternoons. Harold yelling at the television while Daniel sat beside him, pretending not to care even though he screamed louder than anyone whenever Dallas scored. Claire, making popcorn in the kitchen. Me, pretending to hate the noise while secretly loving every second of it. Back then, our house felt alive. Warm. Safe. Now it probably smelled like Vanessa's expensive candles and control. The thought made my chest ache. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Gloria stepped into the room carrying folded towels. You okay? I nodded automatically. She gave me a look that said she knew I was lying. After setting the towels down, she sat carefully on the edge of the chair beside my bed. You know what the saddest part is? I asked quietly. What? I keep replaying every family dinner in my head, trying to figure out when she stopped loving us. Gloria was silent for a moment. Then she said something that stayed with me. Maybe she never did. That sentence hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I'd started wondering the same thing. I remembered the first Thanksgiving Vanessa spent with us after marrying Daniel. She complimented the ranch constantly that day. This land must be worth a fortune now. At the time, Harold laughed proudly. Now I realized she wasn't admiring our home. She was evaluating an asset. Another memory surfaced immediately after that. About a year before Harold died, Vanessa started asking strange questions during dinner. What happens to the property if someone gets sick? Are trusts difficult to change? Would Daniel automatically inherit everything? Harold answered politely. But afterward, he told me privately in the kitchen. That girl asks questions like a lawyer. I laughed back then. God, I wish I hadn't. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows, while the nursing home hallway buzzed faintly with distant conversations and rolling carts. Then I remembered something else. 1 week after Harold's funeral, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and found Vanessa going through our filing cabinet. She jumped when she saw me. Oh, Daniel asked me to organize paperwork. At the time, grief made everything blurry. I wanted to believe her. Now I realized she started preparing long before I noticed. Long before the nursing home, long before the lies about memory problems. This wasn't impulsive greed. It was patient greed. Calculated greed. The dangerous kind. Gloria folded her hands quietly. You still trust your son? That question hurt more than anything else so far. Because the honest answer was complicated. Yes, I whispered eventually. But I don't trust a version of reality she's been feeding him. Daniel loved me. I truly believed that. But love becomes fragile when someone whispers fear into it every day. Your mother's declining. Your mother's confused. Your mother needs help. And when people hear something often enough, they stop questioning it. Especially when the liar sounds calm. I stared down at Harold's old watch, resting beside my bed. The hands still frozen on the exact minute his heart stopped. Then, suddenly, I heard his voice in my head again. If anything happens to me, don't let people rush you. I finally understood what he meant. Harold knew exactly what money does after death. It changes people. And now the woman sitting in my kitchen, pretending to be family, was proving him right in the cruelest way possible. I looked out into the dark Texas rain and felt something inside me harden quietly. Not bitterness, resolve. Because Vanessa thought she was fighting a grieving old widow. What she didn't understand yet was that she was fighting the woman Harold trusted to protect everything he built. The next few days changed everything. I stopped behaving like a frightened old woman and started behaving like someone gathering evidence. That shift happened quietly. No dramatic speech, no emotional breakdown, just observations, listening, remembering. Gloria helped more than she probably. Every morning, she found excuses to linger near my room longer than necessary. One morning, she closed the door so softly behind her and placed a thin folder beside me on the bed. You didn't get this from me, she whispered. Inside were copies of my updated medication records. I read every page carefully, and there it was. 3 separate medication changes authorized within 4 days of my arrival, all requested by family representative. Vanessa. I felt my stomach tighten. One prescription was specifically meant to reduce agitation and confusion in elderly patients. Confusion. The irony almost made me sick. They were trying to chemically create the symptoms they claimed I already had. Gloria sat beside me quietly while I kept reading. She keeps calling administration, Gloria said softly. She asks whether you seem cooperative. Cooperative. Like I was some difficult prisoner. I closed the folder slowly. Does she visit often? Every other day. I nodded once. Not because she cared. Because predators monitor progress. That afternoon, Ben returned with another folder tucked beneath his arm. He looked calmer this time, but not less serious. I started digging, he said quietly after sitting down. And there's more. My pulse slowed immediately. Ben opened several documents across the small table near my bed. Bank statements, trust records, property filings. At first, it looked overwhelming. Then patterns started appearing. Small withdrawals from shared accounts. Large household maintenance expenses. Private transfers. Daniel likely never noticed because he was overseas. Ben pointed toward one specific transaction. $28,000. I frowned. For what? An unknown. My chest tightened. Harold tracked every dollar carefully. He believed money should have purpose. Seeing random transfers attached to vague descriptions, like property services, felt deeply wrong. Ben adjusted his glasses. She's moving money slowly enough to avoid attention. That sentence made my skin crawl. Not impulsive greed. Professional greed. Planned greed. I leaned back slowly against the pillow. Can Daniel reverse it? Possibly, Ben answered carefully. If he realizes what's happening. If. That word sat heavily between us. Because deep down, I knew the hardest part wasn't proving Vanessa manipulated me. It was proving it to my son. A mother can survive betrayal. But disappointing your child, that pain reaches somewhere deeper. Ben must have noticed my expression, because his voice softened slightly. You still think Daniel doesn't know? I looked down at my hands. I think Daniel trusts his wife more than he trusts his instincts. Ben nodded slowly. That happens. Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder. I stared at it. What's that for? Protection. I looked back up carefully. Ben lowered his voice. From now on, every conversation matters. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside my window, Texas sunlight stretched across the parking lot while distant thunder rolled somewhere far away. A storm building slowly. Just like this family. That evening, Vanessa arrived unexpectedly. The second she walked into my room, her entire personality changed into that sweet performance she used for outsiders. There's my favorite girl. I almost admired how quickly she transformed. She carried flowers, fake concerns, a soft voice, everything carefully curated. But now that I understood who she really was, the performance looked almost ridiculous. Vanessa sat beside my bed and touched my hand gently. How are they treating you? I smiled politely. Just fine. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She expected weakness, confusion, fear. Instead, she found calm. That unsettled her. I brought your favorite cookies, she said softly. I looked at the container. Store-bought oatmeal raisin. Not my favorite. She didn't even know me well enough to fake affection correctly. Vanessa crossed her legs elegantly. You know, she continued carefully, Daniel's been very worried. There it was, Daniel. Always used like emotional leverage. I kept my expression neutral. When is he coming home? Soon, she answered quickly. But I told him not to stress himself. You're adjusting beautifully. Adjusting. Like this was permanent. Like my life had already been decided without me. I watched her closely for several seconds. Then I asked quietly, did you already redecorate my bedroom? For the first time, Vanessa looked caught off guard, only briefly, but long enough. We needed more space, she answered carefully. Needed. Not wanted. Needed. I imagined strangers touching Harold's things, moving our photographs, replacing our blankets, erasing me piece by piece while I sat trapped in this facility. Something cold settled inside my chest. Not sadness anymore. Purpose. Vanessa stood to leave a few minutes later. Before walking out, she paused near the door. Oh, one more thing, she said lightly. The realtor stopped by the house yesterday. My heartbeat stopped. What realtor? She smiled gently. Just exploring options. Options. That woman was trying to sell my life while I was still breathing. After she left, I sat frozen for several long seconds. Then slowly, very slowly, I reached beneath my blanket and pressed the small recorder Ben had given me. Still running, every word captured, every lie preserved. And for the first time since arriving there, I realized something important. Vanessa thought she was controlling the story. She had no idea the evidence against her had already started building. 3 days later, Daniel came home unexpectedly. Nobody warned me. Not Vanessa. Not the nursing home staff. I was sitting near the courtyard window reading the same page of a magazine for nearly 20 minutes when I heard his voice in the hallway. Mom, my heart nearly stopped. I looked up too fast. And there he was standing in the doorway wearing a wrinkled, navy blue buttoned shirt and exhaustion all over his face. His beard had grown in unevenly from travel, and his eyes looked darker than I remembered. For one painful second, he looked exactly like Harold. "Daniel!" I whispered. He crossed the room quickly and hugged me hard enough to make my chest ache. Real hugs, tell the truth people try to hide. And that hug told me my son still loved me, which somehow made everything worse. "You should have told me things were this bad," he said quietly. There it was, the narrative, already planted deep inside him. I pulled back slowly and studied his face. "What exactly did Vanessa tell you?" Daniel hesitated. Too long. That hesitation said everything. "She said you were struggling," he answered carefully. "Confusion. Memory issues. Forgetting medication." His voice trailed off. Because now he was actually looking at me. Not listening to Vanessa. Looking at me. And people become dangerous to manipulators the second they start observing reality for themselves. I gave a small smile. "Do I seem confused to you?" Daniel frowned immediately. "No, but what?" He rubbed the back of his neck the same way Harold used to, whenever stress started building. Inside him. "Mom, the doctors recommended supervision." Doctors, plural, interesting, because I only remembered one doctor, and he barely looked at me during the appointment. I stayed calm. That part mattered. Anger would help Vanessa. Calm forced Daniel to think. "Did Vanessa tell you they changed my medication after bringing me here?" His expression shifted instantly. "What medication?" There it was. The first crack, tiny, but real. I leaned back slowly in my chair. The nurses tried giving me antipsychotics. Daniel stared at me. "What?" I refused them. "That doesn't make sense." "No," I said quietly. "It doesn't." Silence filled the room. Outside, wind moved softly through the dry Texas trees, while distant thunder rolled somewhere far away. Storm weather again. Daniel sat down across from me, suddenly looking less certain than when he walked in. "She said, you were getting aggressive sometimes." Aggressive. I almost laughed. At 72 years old, the most aggressive thing I'd done recently was argue with a grocery store cashier over expired milk. But I understood what Vanessa was doing. Aggression, confusion, instability. Those words create legal pathways. They justify control. I looked directly at my son. "Daniel, when was the last time you heard me forget something important?" He opened his mouth, then stopped, because there wasn't an answer, not a real one. I watched conflict slowly begin spreading across his face. Confusion, doubt, guilt, the beginning of awareness. And honestly, that hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Because my son wasn't evil. He was manipulated. There's a difference. Daniel lowered his voice. "She said you agreed to come here." I held his gaze steadily. "Does this look voluntary to you?" That question hit him hard. I saw it immediately. His eyes moved slowly around the room, for the first time. The tiny bed, the locked medication drawer, the bland walls, the absence of everything that made me me. No family quilts, no Harold, no home. Just a quiet old woman sitting alone beside a window. Daniel swallowed hard. Then came the question I'd been waiting for. Why would Vanessa lie? I looked down briefly at Harold's watch around my wrist, then back up at my son. "The ranch," he frowned immediately. "What? Your father protected that property carefully before he died." Daniel shook his head automatically. "Vanessa doesn't care about the ranch." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked softly, "Did she mention a realtor visiting the house?" The color drained from his face instantly. Tiny shift. Tiny silence. But enough. "She said she was just exploring options," he muttered weakly. "Options, that word again." I nodded slowly. "Daniel, she changed the locks before I even unpacked here." Now he looked genuinely disturbed. Not defensive. disturbed. Because suddenly pieces weren't fitting together anymore. That's the thing about lies. Maintaining them requires perfect consistency. And Vanessa had started moving too fast. Daniel stood up and paced toward the window. She told me you were deteriorating quickly. I watched his shoulders tense tightly beneath his shirt. She said she was trying to protect you. Protect. Another poisoned word. I kept my voice calm. She also tried medicating me into compliance. Daniel turned sharply. No. Yes. Silence again. Heavy silence. The kind that changes families forever. Finally, he spoke softly without turning around. I don't know what to believe right now. That sentence broke my heart more than anything else. Because I realized my son was standing directly between two versions of reality, and whichever one he chose would destroy the other. A soft knock interrupted us. Gloria stepped inside holding paperwork, but stopped immediately when she saw Daniel. Oh, she said gently. I didn't realize you had company. Daniel looked at her quickly. I'm her son. Something flickered across Gloria's face. Recognition. Opportunity. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. Your mother has been asking excellent questions about her treatment plan. Daniel frowned. Gloria continued carefully. Honestly, she's one of the most mentally sharp residents we have. The room went completely still. And for the first time since Vanessa brought me there, I saw real fear begin creeping into my son's eyes. Daniel stayed at the nursing home for almost 2 hours after Gloria left the room. Most of that time, he barely spoke. He just sat beside the window staring out at the parking lot, while his wedding ring tapped nervously against the armrest of the chair. I recognized that habit immediately. Harold used to do the same thing whenever something was bothering him deeply. Finally, Daniel looked at me. Why didn't you call me sooner? The question hurt more than I expected. Because the honest answer sounded pathetic. Every time we talked, I said quietly. Vanessa was there. He looked down immediately, and there it was again. Guilt, heavy now, visible. I folded my hands carefully in my lap. She answered questions for me before I could speak. She kept telling you I was confused. After a while, I paused softly. I started realizing you believed her. Daniel rubbed his face slowly. I thought she was helping. I know. That was the tragedy of it. Manipulators rarely isolate people using force. They isolate them by sounding reasonable. Concerned, patient. And Vanessa had mastered that performance perfectly. Daniel stood up suddenly and started pacing the room again. I need to talk to her. I looked at him carefully. No, I said calmly. He stopped. What? If you confront her too early, she'll destroy evidence. That sentence landed hard. Because somewhere deep down, Daniel already knew evidence existed. He just wasn't ready to admit how bad this really was. I reached slowly into the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the small digital recorder Ben gave me. Daniel frowned immediately. What's that? Protection. I pressed play. Vanessa's voice filled the room almost instantly. We already changed the locks, by the way. Daniel's entire body went still. Then another recording. Once she's declared mentally unstable, everything transfers faster. Silence. Absolute silence. The color drained from my son's face. So quickly it frightened me for a second. That's not, he whispered weakly. That can't be. But it was. And he knew it. I watched his entire understanding of his marriage begin collapsing in real time. There's something uniquely heartbreaking about watching your child realize they married someone dangerous, especially when that realization comes too late. Daniel sat back down slowly, like his legs no longer trusted him. She said you wanted more care. I didn't answer. Because what was left to say? The recording spoke louder than either of us could. After nearly a full minute, Daniel whispered, "Oh my God," not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like someone mourning. I looked out the window while he tried processing everything. Texas sunlight, stretched across the courtyard. Now, residents moved slowly through the garden paths, with walkers and wheelchairs, while nurses chatted. Nearby, like nothing life-changing, was happening inside that tiny room. But for Daniel, everything had changed. "I trusted her," he said finally. Those 4 words nearly broke me, because he sounded like a little boy again. Not a grown man, not an executive managing billion-dollar projects overseas. Just my son. Heartbroken, I reached over and touched his hand gently. She counted on that. Daniel stared at the recorder still sitting between us. Then another realization hit him. The realtor. I nodded once. "She's preparing to sell the ranch." "No," he muttered immediately, almost automatically. "No, she wouldn't." Then he stopped talking halfway through the sentence. Because now he was remembering things too. I could see it happening behind his eyes. Moments. Comments. Conversations that suddenly looked different now. Daniel leaned forward slowly. "She kept asking about the trust after Dad died." I stayed quiet. "She said she wanted to help organize financials." Another pause. Then his voice lowered. "She asked me once how difficult competency hearings were in Texas." My chest tightened. There it was. The beginning. Long before the nursing home. Long before the medication. Vanessa had been studying legal pathways around me for years. Daniel looked physically sick now. I thought she was being practical. "That's what manipulative people do," I said softly. "They disguise ambition as concern." He leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for several seconds. Then finally asked the question that mattered most. What do we do now? We, not she, not you, we. That single word told me. My son was finally waking up. I took a slow breath before answering. "We let her believe her plan is working." Daniel frowned immediately. "You want me to pretend everything's normal?" "Yes, that's insane." "No," I said quietly. "What's insane is underestimating someone who's already willing to put an old woman in a nursing home for money." That shut him up immediately, because now he understood exactly what kind of person he was dealing with. A soft knock interrupted us again. Ben stepped inside carrying another folder. The second Daniel saw him, confusion spread across his face. "Ben?" Ben nodded calmly. "Good. You're here." Daniel looked between us. "What's going on?" Ben closed the door carefully behind him, then placed several legal documents onto the small table. "Your wife," he said evenly, "has made multiple unauthorized attempts to gain control over portions of your father's estate." Daniel stared at him blankly. Ben continued. "She also attempted to initiate property transition discussions while your mother was being evaluated for competency." The room became so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of Harold's watch beside me. Tick, tick, tick. Daniel lowered himself slowly back into the chair. Like the truth itself had physical weight. And when he finally looked back at me, his eyes were full of something I never wanted my child to feel: shame. Vanessa invited the entire family to dinner 3 nights later. That alone told me she still felt confident. Manipulative people only perform publicly when they believe they control the narrative. Daniel played his role perfectly. That part surprised me. When he picked me up from the nursing home that evening, he acted calm, tired, maybe, quiet, but controlled. Vanessa kissed him at the front door like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't spent weeks trying to erase his mother legally. Watching her smile that night felt almost surreal. The dining room looked beautiful when we arrived. Candles flickered softly across the long oak table. Harold built by hand almost 30 years earlier. Vanessa had used the expensive china reserved for holidays and arranged fresh flowers in crystal vases like some magazine advertisement for the perfect American family. Everything looked warm, elegant, normal. That's what made it disturbing. Because underneath all that beauty, this family was rotting. Claire had flown in from Oregon that morning, after Daniel finally told her part of the truth. My daughter looked exhausted the second she walked Through the door, her eyes immediately found mine across the room. Then she hugged me so tightly, I nearly cried. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. I held her hand a little longer than usual after that, because suddenly I realized something painful. Vanessa hadn't just isolated me from my home. She'd slowly isolated me from my family, too. Dinner began quietly. Too quietly, silverware clinked softly against plates, while country music played low through the kitchen speakers. Vanessa moved around the table, pouring wine and smiling gently at everyone, like she was hosting a church fundraiser instead of sitting in the middle of a collapsing marriage. Every few minutes, she touched Daniel's shoulder affectionately. Performing. Always performing. Claire noticed it too. I could tell by the way her jaw tightened every time Vanessa spoke. "So," Vanessa said brightly while cutting into her steak, "Margaret seems much happier lately." Daniel didn't answer. That silence lasted maybe 2 seconds too long. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her eyes flickered toward him briefly before she smiled again. "I think structure has really helped her." Structure. Interesting word for imprisonment. Kept eating slowly. Calmly. That part mattered. People reveal themselves faster when you stop interrupting them. Vanessa reached for her wine glass and continued speaking in that careful little voice she used whenever she wanted to sound compassionate. "The nursing staff says she's adjusting beautifully." Claire looked confused. "Nursing staff?" Daniel set his fork down quietly. "Mom shouldn't have been there in the first place. The room went still. Vanessa blinked once. Only once. But I saw it. The panic underneath her smile. "Oh," she laughed softly. "Daniel, we talked about this." "No," he interrupted quietly. "You talked." I listened. That sentence changed the air in the room instantly. Vanessa looked at him carefully now. Really carefully. Like she was trying to calculate how much he knew. She recovered fast. That's the terrifying thing about people like her. They adapt quickly. "I was trying to protect your mother," she said gently. There it was again. Protect. The word sounded poisonous now. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. "By changing the locks? Silence!" Claire's head snapped toward Vanessa immediately. "What?" Vanessa forced a laugh. "That's not what happened." "Really?" Daniel asked softly. His calmness scared her more than anger would have, because calm people are harder to manipulate emotionally. Vanessa set her wine glass down carefully. "We needed security while the house was empty." "Mom was alive," Claire said sharply. The room became painfully quiet. I watched Vanessa's expression shift, almost invisibly. Tiny adjustments. Tiny calculations. Searching for control again. Then she looked directly at me. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "you understand why we were worried, don't you?" There it was. The performance. She wanted me emotional, confused, reactive, anything she could later label instability. Instead, I folded my napkin slowly into my lap and looked directly back at her. "I understand more than you think." For the first time all evening, Vanessa looked genuinely nervous, just for a second. But long enough. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket quietly, then placed the digital recorder onto the dining table. The sound it made against the wood felt louder than thunder. Vanessa stared at it immediately, and suddenly, all the color drained from her face. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even Claire looked confused now. Daniel's voice stayed calm. Too calm. "Would you like to explain this before I press play?" Vanessa swallowed hard. "I don't know what that is." Lie. Instant lie. Bad sign. Daniel stared at her for several painful seconds. Then finally pressed the button. Static crackled softly through the dining room speakers. Then Vanessa's voice filled the house. "We already changed the locks. By the way," Claire gasped quietly. Vanessa went completely still. But Daniel didn't stop the recording. A second later, another sentence played through the room. "Once she's declared mentally unstable, everything transfers faster." Silence. Absolute silence. Claire slowly turned toward Vanessa like she no longer recognized the woman sitting beside her brother. My daughter-in-law opened her mouth immediately. It's out of context. No, Daniel interrupted coldly. I think the context is finally very clear, and in that moment, sitting beneath candlelight inside the home, Harold built with his bare hands, I watched Vanessa realize something she never expected. The story was no longer hers to control. Nobody moved after the recording ended. The entire dining room felt frozen in place. The candles still flickered softly. Country music still played somewhere in the kitchen. Outside, Texas wind rattled the porch windows gently like the world hadn't just split open inside that house. But it had. Vanessa looked at Daniel first. Not me. Not Claire, Daniel. Because manipulators always focus on the person whose belief gives them power. Her voice came out shaky for the first time since I'd known her. Daniel, listen to me. He didn't answer. That scared her more. She stood suddenly from the table, forcing out a nervous laugh. This is insane. Those recordings are being twisted. Sit down, Daniel said quietly. Not loudly, not emotionally, quietly, and somehow that was worse. Vanessa slowly sat back down. I watched her carefully. The mask was slipping now, tiny cracks, appearing around the edges of her perfect composure. Claire folded her arms tightly across her chest. You tried putting Mom in memory care. Vanessa looked desperate suddenly. She was struggling. No, Daniel said coldly. You needed her struggling. That sentence landed like a gunshot. Vanessa's eyes widened. For years, she controlled conversations by staying calm while everyone else became emotional. But now Daniel was calmer than she was, and she had no idea how to fight that. I was trying to protect this family, she whispered. I finally spoke. By drugging me? Silence. Vanessa turned toward me slowly. I never drugged you. I reached into my purse calmly and removed the medication records Gloria copied for me. Then I slid them across the table toward Daniel. He read them silently. The longer he looked, the paler he became. Antipsychotics? He whispered. Vanessa immediately leaned forward. She was agitated. I was grieving. I interrupted quietly. The room went still again. Because everybody understood the difference. Claire looked horrified now. You tried sedating her? Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. The doctors recommended. One doctor, I corrected calmly. A doctor you picked. A doctor who barely spoke to me. Daniel pushed his chair back from the table slowly and stood up. I'd never seen my son look at another human being the way he looked at his wife in that moment. Not rage, not heartbreak, disgust, pure disgust. How long? He asked quietly. Vanessa blinked. What? How long were you planning this? No one was planning anything. Lie again. Too fast. Too emotional now. Daniel laughed once under his breath, but there was no humor in it. The realtor, Vanessa. She froze. The locks, another pause. The medication. Vanessa's breathing became uneven. Then she made the biggest mistake manipulative people always make eventually. She got angry. Real angry. Not polished anger. Not controlled concern. Ugly anger. You were never supposed to stay in that house forever! She snapped suddenly. The entire room went silent. Even she realized too late what she'd just revealed. Claire stared at her in disbelief. Vanessa stood up again, shaking now. That house is too big for one person. Daniel and I have a future too. A family. Children. There it was. Finally, the truth underneath the performance. Not concern. Entitlement. She looked directly at me. You were sitting on millions of dollars while everyone else sacrificed around you. I almost smiled. Because, suddenly, she sounded exactly like who she truly was. Daniel looked devastated. My mother sacrificed her entire life for this family. Vanessa laughed bitterly. And what about us? We were supposed to wait around until she died? Claire gasped softly. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, like hearing those words physically hurt him. But Vanessa kept going. That's the thing about people who spend years hiding their real selves. Once the mask cracks, everything pours out. She's old, Daniel. The ranch was going to become ours eventually anyway. Eventually. That word echoed through the dining room like something rotten. I folded my hands quietly in my lap, then spoke calmly. You rushed the process. Vanessa turned toward me sharply. What? You got greedy. That sentence hit her hard because deep down, she knew it was true. If she'd simply waited, maybe nobody would have questioned anything. But greed makes people impatient. And impatient people make mistakes. At that exact moment, the front door opened. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Then Ben Carter walked into the dining room, carrying a thick leather folder beneath his arm. Vanessa's face went completely white. Ben looked around the table calmly before placing the folder beside Daniel. I apologize for interrupting dinner, he said evenly, but I believe this concerns everyone. Daniel stared at him silently. Ben opened the folder carefully. Inside were legal documents, property records, trust amendments, copies of financial transfers. Every piece of evidence Vanessa thought nobody would ever connect. Ben adjusted his glasses slowly. Earlier today, he said calmly, Margaret Whitmore officially updated Harold Whitmore's family trust. Vanessa stopped breathing. I could almost see it happen, Ben continued. The ranch property, investment holdings, and all protected estate assets have now been transferred into an irreversible preservation trust. Daniel looked confused. What does that mean? Ben's voice stayed perfectly calm. It means, he said quietly, your wife no longer has access to any of it. Silence. Then something happened I will never forget for the rest of my life. Vanessa looked at me. Not with fake sweetness, not with performance, with hatred, real hatred. And that was the exact moment my son finally saw her clearly for the first time. Vanessa stood in the middle of the dining room like someone watching her entire future collapse in real time. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound came from the soft crackling of candle flames and the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Daniel stared at the trust. Documents spread across the table while Ben calmly adjusted his glasses beside him. You changed the trust? Daniel asked quietly. I nodded once. This morning. Vanessa laughed suddenly. Not because anything was funny. Because panic was finally taking over. You can't do that, she snapped. She's under evaluation for competency. Ben looked at her evenly. Actually, he replied calmly. 2 independent specialists evaluated Margaret yesterday. Vanessa's expression froze. Ben continued. Both confirmed she is mentally sound and fully capable of managing her affairs. That hit her hard. I saw it instantly, because the entire plan depended on one thing. Me looking weak, confused, easy to erase. And now that foundation was gone. Vanessa looked at Daniel desperately. She manipulated this. Your mother has hated me for years. That almost made Claire laugh. Hated you? She said sharply. Mom defended you constantly. And it was true. Even when little things felt wrong over the years. I protected Vanessa. When she skipped holidays. When she criticized Harold's traditions. When she slowly isolated Daniel from the family. I kept making excuses because I wanted my son's marriage to survive. Funny how mothers destroy themselves trying to protect their children from pain. Daniel looked physically exhausted now. Like every memory from the last 5 years suddenly carried a different meaning. You lied to me, he whispered. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears immediately. Real tears this time. But even then, something about them felt selfish instead of remorseful. I did everything for us, she cried. Everything. No, Daniel said quietly. You did everything for yourself. That sentence broke something inside her. I watched the anger return instantly. Sharp. Ugly. She pointed directly at me. She was never going to give us that house. Us, still talking about the ranch. Still talking about property while her marriage burned down around her. Ben opened another folder calmly. There's another matter we need to address.
Vanessa turned toward him slowly.
The color disappeared from her face again. Ben removed several bank statements and placed them onto the table. Over the last 14 months, he said, evenly, multiple unauthorized transfers were made from estate-connected accounts. Daniel frowned immediately. What transfers? Ben slid the paperwork toward him. Nearly $90,000. Claire gasped softly. Daniel stared at the numbers silently, then slowly looked up at his wife. Vanessa didn't deny it. That part shocked me most. She looked cornered now. Desperate people stop pretending once they realize the walls are closing in. I was managing expenses, she muttered weakly. Ben's expression never changed. Luxury retail purchases are not classified as estate expenses. Daniel flipped through the pages faster now. Jewelry stores, private travel expenses, furniture orders, designer boutiques. My stomach turned quietly. Harold worked 40 years for that money. 40 years, early mornings, late nights, bad knees, missed vacations. And this woman spent it like she won a lottery ticket. Daniel looked up slowly. You stole from my mother? Vanessa slammed her hand against the table. I'm your wife, and she's my mother. Silence again. Heavy silence. Vanessa suddenly looked terrified for the first time all night, not angry. Not defensive. Terrified. Because she finally realized something important. Daniel was slipping away from her, and without Daniel, she had nothing. No ranch, no inheritance, no future she imagined. Just consequences. You're choosing her over me, she whispered. Daniel stared at her for several long seconds, then said the sentence that ended his marriage. No, he answered quietly. You chose money over all of us. Vanessa began crying harder after that, but nobody moved toward her. Nobody comforted her, because once people finally see manipulation clearly, sympathy disappears fast. Claire stood slowly from the table and walked toward me instead. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders gently. I'm sorry we started to see it sooner, she whispered. That nearly broke me. Not because of Vanessa, because my children looked heartbroken. Families don't collapse in one moment. They collapse slowly, one lie at a time. Ben closed the folders neatly. There will also be a formal investigation regarding the medical authorization requests. Vanessa's head snapped upward immediately. What investigation? Ben's voice stayed calm. Attempting to falsely establish mental incompetence for financial gain carries serious legal consequences in Texas. Now she looked like she might actually faint. Good. For weeks I sat alone in that nursing home, wondering whether I was losing my mind because someone else kept insisting I was. Now she finally understood what fear felt like. Daniel pushed his chair back slowly and stood up. You need to leave, Vanessa blinked. What? You heard me. Her voice cracked completely now. Daniel, please, leave. Not loud, not emotional. Done. Finished. Final. Vanessa looked around the dining room desperately, like she expected someone to save her. Nobody did. Then she looked at me one last time. And even now, even after everything, I still saw something frightening in her expression. Not regret, resentment. Like she still believed she deserved what she tried stealing. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands and walked toward the front door. Her heels clicked sharply against Harold's wooden floors one final time. Click! 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 Then the front door slammed shut behind her. And just like that, the silence inside the house felt different. Not empty, free. The house felt strangely quiet after Vanessa left. Not empty, not sad, just honest. For the first time in years, there was no performance sitting at the dinner table. No carefully crafted concern. No fake smiles hiding calculations underneath. Just family. Broken family, maybe, but real. Claire stayed beside me while Ben gathered the paperwork quietly. Daniel hadn't moved from the dining room window in almost 10 minutes. He stood there staring out into the dark Texas night, like he no longer recognized his own life. I understood that feeling. Betrayal doesn't only destroy trust in other people. It destroys trust in your own judgment. Finally, Daniel turned around slowly. "I'm so sorry, Mom." His voice cracked on the last word. And suddenly he wasn't 50 years old anymore. He was the little boy who used to run into my bedroom after nightmares during thunderstorms. I stood up carefully and walked toward him. Then I touched his face gently, the same way I used to when he was small. "This isn't your shame to carry," I whispered. But deep down, we both knew it would stay with him anyway. Because some mistakes leave scars long after the damage is repaired. Claire quietly began clearing the dinner plates from the table while Ben prepared to leave. Before walking out, he stopped beside me. "Harold would be proud of you," he said softly. That nearly broke me, not because I needed praise, because I missed my husband. God, I missed him. After everyone went to bed, I stayed awake alone in the kitchen for a while. The ranch house creaked softly around me, the same way it always had at night. Wind moved through the trees outside. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried into the darkness. Home! I looked around slowly. The old wooden cabinet's Harold installed himself. The coffee stains near the sink he always promised to repaint. The family photographs lining the hallway. Everything suddenly felt alive again, not because the pain disappeared, because the manipulation was finally gone. I walked onto the porch just before sunrise, wrapped in Harold's old flannel jacket. Texas mornings always carried a certain silence before the heat arrived. Cool air moved across the fields, while the sky slowly turned pale gold over the horizon. This used to be our favorite time of day. Harold would sit beside me, drinking black coffee, while pretending not to watch the sunrise even though he loved it more than anyone I knew. I sat down in the porch swing and held my coffee cup between both hands. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. No nursing home walls, no whispered lies, no one questioning my mind. Just quiet. Daniel stepped onto the porch a few minutes later. He looked exhausted, older somehow. He sat beside me silently. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then finally he asked, "Do you think Dad knew?" I smiled faintly into my coffee. Harold understood people better than most. Daniel looked down. "I should have protected you." I turned toward my son carefully. "No," I said softly. "You should listen to yourself sooner. That hurt him." I could see it immediately. But sometimes truth hurts because it heals crooked things back into place. Daniel wiped his face tiredly. "She kept telling me you were slipping away." I stared out across the fields. "And little by little, you started believing her." He nodded silently. There was nothing left to deny now. The divorce papers came 2 months later. Vanessa fought viciously at first. Ben warned us she probably would. But once the financial investigation began and the medical records were reviewed, her confidence disappeared quickly. Turns out greed looks much smaller under legal lighting. Daniel never spoke badly about her after that. That told me he truly loved her once. People who were never sincere usually become cruel after betrayal. Daniel became quiet instead. Claire started visiting more often after everything happened. Sometimes she stayed for entire weekends, helping me garden or cook while we talked about old memories we almost lost during all the chaos. And slowly, the house became warm again. Different, but warm. One evening, months later, I found Harold's old handwritten note tucked inside one of his toolboxes in the garage. It simply said, "If you're reading this, I probably forgot where I left it again." I laughed so hard, I cried. Then cried so hard, I laughed again. Funny how healing works sometimes. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just small moments reminding you life still belongs to you. That nursing home, eventually lost several staff members after investigators reviewed patient medication complaints tied to certain family-authorized requests. Gloria retired shortly after and still calls me every Sunday afternoon just to gossip and ask about the garden. And me? I still sit on this porch every morning with my coffee watching the Texas sunrise spread across Harold's land. Our land. Not because of money, because of memory, because love still lives here, because survival does too. And sometimes, when the morning air turns cold and the wind moves softly through the trees, I can almost hear Harold beside me again. Proud, peaceful, home. They thought age made me powerless. What they forgot was that I survived everything before them.